It was a damp, gray morning in Fairview Park, a patch of quiet green tucked away on the outskirts of Louisville, Kentucky. The distant rumble of traffic drifted through the trees as early dog walkers and joggers made their rounds, barely glancing at the old man sitting alone on a weathered wooden bench beneath a leafless oak. His name was Frank Miller, and if anyone bothered to look closely, they'd see more than a homeless figure clutching a battered backpack. They'd see a faded army field jacket with a neatly stitched American flag on the sleeve and a tattered baseball cap embroidered with the words, Vietnam Veteran, 1st Cavalry Division. For Frank, the park was the only place that didn't remind him of how the world had moved on without him. In his pocket, an old photograph pressed against his heart. A picture of a young soldier crouched beside a scrawny German shepherd pup somewhere in the jungles of Vietnam. No one ever asked about the dog in the photo, and Frank never volunteered the story. It hurt too much to explain how the world had a way of tearing good things away from good men. At the park entrance, a black and white Louisville Metro police cruiser pulled up quietly. 4 officers stepped out, boots crunching over wet gravel. In the back of the K9 unit, a large German shepherd shifted restlessly, nose pressed to the cage bars. His name was Maverick, and to his handler, Officer Luke Henderson, Maverick was the best partner on the force. Disciplined, fearless, and obedient to every command. Sergeant Mark Turner, a seasoned officer respected for his calm under pressure, scanned the open field. They'd received 2 calls already. Suspicious male loitering near the playground, possibly intoxicated or armed. Turner knew how easily misunderstandings turned tragic when fear got ahead of facts. He raised a hand to signal caution. Keep it calm. Henderson, keep Maverick tight. As they approached, Maverick's entire body went rigid. His ears perked forward, nose high, eyes locked on the hunched figure on the bench. Henderson tugged the leash, confused by Maverick's sudden tension. Easy, boy. Heel. But Maverick ignored him, a low whine vibrating in his throat. Something Henderson had never heard from the dog before. Frank heard the footsteps long before he saw the dark blue uniforms circle him. He looked up slowly, blinking at Maverick's silhouette pushing against Henderson's grip. In that instant, the empty park fell away. Frank saw not Louisville, but rain-drenched jungle, flares in the night sky, and a tiny pup shivering in his lap under a torn poncho. Sir, stand up and keep your hands where we can see them, Turner ordered, voice calm but carrying the authority of a man who'd done this too many times before. Frank pushed himself up with effort, shoulders stiff, hands spread in a weary gesture of surrender. But his eyes never left Maverick's. The dog let out a bark, sharp but uncertain, then strained forward, ignoring Henderson's tightening hold. Sir, any weapons on you today? Henderson asked automatically. Maverick's whine rose louder, vibrating against the morning chill. Frank's cracked lips curved into a sad smile. No weapons left in this old soldier, son. Just stories no one ever wants to hear. He lowered his hand, palm outstretched toward Maverick. The dog stepped closer, ignoring every shouted command, and pressed his muzzle into Frank's trembling palm, just like he had all those years ago, before a war and a world tore them apart. For a long moment, no one moved. The other officers exchanged uneasy glances as Maverick leaned harder into Frank's open palm, ignoring the leash biting into his broad chest. Officer Henderson's face turned from confusion to a kind of quiet shock. His perfectly trained K9, the department's pride, was frozen in place, whining like a lost puppy reunited with its master. Sergeant Turner broke the silence first, clearing his throat to mask the shiver crawling up his spine. Mr. Miller, you need to step back from the dog, sir. But the words sounded empty even to him. He could see it. Maverick wasn't going to attack. He wasn't going to obey. He was home, somehow, with this ragged old man who smelled like cigarettes and decades-old sorrow. Frank's eyes glistened as he knelt down, ignoring the creak in his knees. He buried his fingers behind Maverick's ear, scratching the exact spot that used to calm the pup on sleepless nights under monsoon rain and mortar fire. Look at you, Frank whispered, voice cracking under the weight of memories. I thought you were gone, boy. They told me you ran off when I shipped out. He pressed his forehead gently to Maverick's. The dog closed his eyes, tail wagging weakly, oblivious to the confused cops standing guard around them. Henderson loosened his grip on the leash, suddenly ashamed to hold it so tight. He glanced at Turner, hoping for an order, any order, but the sergeant just shook his head slightly. Turner understood what was happening even if he couldn't explain it. Some bonds didn't care about training manuals or duty rosters. Some bonds simply refused to die. A small crowd had started to gather by the park's walking path. Dog walkers pausing mid-step, a jogger slowing to a stop, phones discreetly raised to capture what looked like a miracle in real time. Henderson swallowed hard, feeling their eyes on him as if he were the villain in this scene. He knelt next to Frank and Maverick, lowering his voice so only Frank could hear. "Sir, how is this possible? He was found as a stray in Georgia 5 years ago, transferred to the Louisville K-9 program. No records before that. No name. Nothing." Frank didn't look up. He just kept his hand on Maverick's fur, grounding himself in a moment that felt more real than anything he'd known in decades. He wasn't just a stray son. He was family. We saved each other once. And the world, well, it lost track of both of us. He finally met Henderson's eyes, the edges of his lips turning up in a sad but proud smile. "Seems we found each other again when neither of us had anything left but old ghosts." Turner stepped closer, lowering his radio and taking in the sight. An old soldier, a forgotten dog, and a truth that wouldn't stay buried forever. In the distance, more sirens echoed faintly through the city, but in that corner of Fairview Park, time seemed to hold its breath for two souls who'd refused to forget each other, no matter how far apart the world had dragged them. Sergeant Turner's radio crackled again, demanding an update on what was quickly becoming more than a routine check on a suspicious man in the park. He turned the volume down, unwilling to break the fragile moment between Frank and Maverick. Henderson stayed kneeling beside them, torn between doing his job and protecting something that felt too human to ruin with procedure and paperwork. A young officer, Deputy Carla Ruiz, shifted nervously beside Turner. "Sergeant, dispatch wants to know if we're bringing Mr. Miller in. They're asking about potential trespassing charges, maybe mental health evaluation." Her voice faltered as she watched Maverick curl closer to Frank's knee, letting out a sigh so soft it nearly broke her heart. Turner rubbed a hand across his jaw, feeling the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. Everything he'd learned in 20 years of policing told him this was out of his hands now. But the look on Frank's face, the silent trust in Maverick's eyes, it demanded more than protocol. He turned to Henderson, voice low. "Luke, what's your gut say?" Henderson hesitated, eyes flicking from Maverick to Frank. "Sir, I trust Maverick with my life. And if he says this man's no threat, then I believe him over any background check. But," he swallowed hard, feeling the eyes of the growing crowd, "if the department finds out we didn't detain him, it's our heads." Frank lifted his gaze, the lines in his face deepened by the early sun now breaking through the clouds. "I'm not asking you boys for favors. I know how the game works. You need to write your reports, cover your backs. Do what you have to. But I'm telling you, he's not going anywhere without me again." His hand tightened gently on Maverick's neck, the defiance in his tone echoing the stubborn courage that had carried him through jungles and hospitals and sleepless years on the streets. Turner exhaled, decision made. "Deputy Ruiz, tell dispatch we're bringing both of them in. Voluntary protective hold. No cuffs." He looked at Frank, offering a hand to help him stand. "Mr. Miller, come with us. Let's get you somewhere warm. We'll sort the rest later. I promise you, no one's separating you two without one hell of a fight from me first." Frank's eyes glistened, not from weakness but from something like gratitude long denied. Slowly, he stood, leaning heavily on the bench before bracing himself on Turner's arm. Maverick rose too, staying pressed to Frank's leg, tail brushing the sergeant's boot as if to seal the deal. Around them, the onlookers lowered their phones, whispers replaced by an unspoken reverence. For a bond unbroken by war, time, or any badge trying to stand in its way. The ride back to the precinct was tense, but not hostile. Frank sat in the back seat of the cruiser, Maverick's massive head resting in his lap. He absent-mindedly scratched behind the dog's ears, each stroke grounding him more firmly in the present than any medication or therapy ever could. Up front, Sergeant Turner and Officer Henderson spoke in low tones, but Frank could still catch snippets. Words like internal affairs, paper trail, and public interest. He knew trouble when he heard it. Henderson risked a glance in the rearview mirror. Seeing Maverick so calm made him doubt everything he'd been taught about loyalty and command. He trained this dog himself: obedience, search and rescue, takedown drills. But none of that training had prepared him for the quiet truth. Maverick's heart had always belonged to someone else. And Henderson wondered, not without pain, whether he had ever really known him at all. Sergeant Turner tapped the steering wheel, thinking ahead. The moment this story leaked, and reporters would swarm the precinct. Some would spin it as a feel-good miracle, a veteran reunited with his war companion. Others would ask hard questions about the department's K-9 program, missing records, and why a dog with a past like Maverick's had ended up on the streets of Georgia before becoming Louisville's prized police dog. Turner's stomach knotted at the thought of the politics waiting for him behind the squad room doors. Frank stared out the window, the city sliding past in gray and green smears. He wasn't afraid of questions. He'd survived far worse than the prying curiosity of bureaucrats. What haunted him now was simpler. What had Maverick endured while they were apart? Who had fed him, hurt him, loved him, or failed to? He whispered a promise only Maverick could hear. Not again, boy. No more orders, no more cages. Not if I can help it. Maverick shifted closer, pressing his weight into Frank's knee as if to answer back. Back at the precinct, Deputy Carla Ruiz was waiting at the entrance, holding the door open as Henderson guided Frank inside. Maverick walked beside Frank off-leash, ignoring the curious stares from officers behind glass walls. Word of the park incident had spread like wildfire. Young rookies peeked over cubicles, whispering about the old vet who'd stolen their K-9's heart. Some looked amused. Others looked uneasy, already guessing this was no simple reunion. It was a challenge to every line in the rulebook. Inside an interview room, Turner motioned for Frank to sit. He pulled up a chair across from him, Henderson leaning against the far wall, arms crossed but eyes softening when they met Maverick's. Turner spoke carefully, voice low but firm. Frank, we need you to tell us everything. Where Maverick came from. How you lost him. Anything that might explain why this dog would break his training to get back to you. I'm not your enemy. But if we don't get ahead of this, someone with a badge and no soul will find a way to take him from you again. Frank leaned back in the cold metal chair, eyes flicking to the one-way glass behind Turner's shoulder. He could feel them watching. Some brass in a crisp uniform, some detective scribbling notes he'd never read. Maverick lay at his feet, calm but alert, his ears twitching every time Frank's voice caught in his throat. Frank's fingers combed absently through the thick fur, grounding him while ghosts stirred behind his tired eyes. I found him outside a bombed-out village in Vietnam, Frank began, voice raspy but steady. I was younger than Officer Henderson here, but old enough to know mercy was in short supply. He was just bones and fleas, hiding under a broken Jeep axle. I fed him scraps from my rations, taught him to come when I whistled. He slept in my foxhole more nights than not. When the jungle got loud, he'd curl into my chest. Reminded me I was still human. Henderson shifted, arms still crossed but his eyes soft. He'd heard plenty of vets talk about buddies, but never one with fur and a tail. Turner listened without interruption, resisting the urge to glance at the mirrored window. He could almost feel the command staff shifting behind the glass, weighing public sympathy against departmental embarrassment. Frank's voice dropped lower. When my tour ended, I begged to take him stateside. They said no. Said dogs were government property, assets like rifles. I raised hell. Threatened to smuggle him in my duffel. Didn't matter. One night, a patrol found him missing. Said he'd run off into the jungle. I spent weeks trying to track him, but I had my papers in hand, and the army don't wait for a grieving fool. He came back alone. Been alone ever since. He gave Maverick a scratch behind the ear, voice cracking. But I guess the jungle didn't want him either. Turner sat forward, elbows on the metal table. Frank, there's no record of any of this. No handler file, no vet paperwork. If you're telling the truth, and looking at that dog, I believe you. Someone either covered it up or dumped him when you left. He survived God knows what, then shows up as a stray in Georgia 30 years later. That's not luck, Frank. That's someone hiding something. Frank's eyes darkened, old anger flickering alive. Son, in war, a dog like him could have seen things no man should. Maybe someone didn't want him coming back with stories no report would dare print. Maybe he slipped through the cracks. Doesn't change one damn thing now. He's mine and I'm his. He leaned closer, his weathered face inches from Turner's steady gaze. You want to protect us, Sergeant? Then you'd better be ready. Because the people who lost him once will want him silent now. And I'm too old to run again. Maverick let out a soft growl, as if agreeing to fight whatever ghosts still waited in the shadows. Sergeant Turner leaned back slowly, absorbing Frank's words like a soldier reading a coded threat he'd seen once before but never truly understood. In the silence that followed, Maverick lifted his head and pressed closer to Frank's boot, the low rumble in his throat vibrating through the stale air of the interview room. Behind the one-way glass, shadows shifted, commanders who now realized they might have inherited a problem too big for protocol to contain. Officer Henderson finally broke the hush. He stepped forward, dropping his crossed arms, eyes flicking between Frank and Turner. So what now, Sarge? You know they're not just gonna let this slide. If there's no paper trail, it means someone made sure there wouldn't be one. And they won't like us poking around asking why a combat dog ended up in Georgia without a handler record. They'll claim he's departmental property, no matter what he remembers. His voice cracked slightly as he glanced at Maverick, the partner who had been more loyal than any badge. Turner nodded slowly, every instinct telling him this wasn't just about a dog. It was about the chain of command, about covering tracks that should have been erased with the last soldier's discharge. Henderson, you're right. If Frank's story holds, and I believe it does, then someone made sure he lost everything. Someone who could do it again. He turned back to Frank, meeting the old man's tired but defiant stare. We'll keep you both here tonight. Safer under our roof than out there until I know who I'm dealing with. Frank gave a humorless chuckle, though his eyes stayed sharp. Don't you worry about me, Sergeant. If they come, they better send more than paperwork and suits. I survived Saigon. I can handle a pencil pusher with a shiny badge and dirty secrets. He reached down, feeling Maverick's warm fur under his palm, steady as a heartbeat. But I'd rather not do it alone this time. So if you're really on my side, you'll get ahead of this before they bury us both in red tape. Henderson bristled, torn between duty and a protective rage he didn't know he had in him until now. Sir, if they try to take him, they'll have to go through me, too. He's my partner. Maybe not first, but he's saved my life more than once. That should count for something, even in this damn city. He spoke louder than he meant to, but none of the officers behind the glass dared interrupt. Turner's jaw tightened as he stood, making his decision before anyone behind that mirror could whisper otherwise. Frank, tonight you and Maverick stay here. Tomorrow I pull every record from Georgia to the Pentagon. I'll find who left you both to rot. And Henderson, get your head clear. If this blows up, we're the only line between them and a story they want dead and buried. So stay sharp. We're not just protecting a dog anymore. We're protecting the truth. And in that cramped room, Maverick's eyes gleamed. A silent promise that he would stand by Frank, come whatever storm might break through those precinct doors by dawn. The precinct quieted as night settled outside, but inside, tension coiled like a rattlesnake under every flickering hallway light. Frank sat on a makeshift cot in an unused office they'd converted into his temporary room. Maverick lay stretched across the floor by the door, ears flicking every time footsteps echoed beyond the thin walls. To Frank, the soft hum of police radios and distant phones was oddly comforting. A war zone of bureaucracy instead of gunfire. Officer Henderson stood guard just outside the door, arms crossed, his badge heavy on his chest tonight. He knew other officers whispered about him, The K9 handler who lost control of his dog. The rookie protector of an old man's impossible story. But he didn't care. Maverick was family, now more than ever. And Frank, well, Frank was living proof that loyalty didn't rust with age. Meanwhile, Sergeant Turner hunched over stacks of files in the squad room. Paperwork from Maverick's adoption, vet records from Georgia, patchy K9 training logs. Each page raised more questions than answers. There were inconsistencies in transfer dates, entire months missing from Maverick's file. He rubbed his temples, feeling the burn of fatigue. Somewhere in these files lay the truth. Maverick had slipped through cracks that looked suspiciously like intentional gaps. And someone high up had wanted it that way. At 2:17 a.m., Turner's phone buzzed on the cluttered desk. A restricted number. He answered, voice low so no one else would stir. Sergeant Turner. A pause, then a calm, authoritative tone slid through the line like a knife under skin. Sergeant, stand down. Release the civilian and the dog. This is no longer your jurisdiction. Turner's grip tightened on the receiver. He didn't bother asking who it was. Only someone with real power could sound so casual about rewriting facts in people's lives. I won't do that, Turner said quietly, forcing steel into every word. You want him gone? You come take him yourself. And pray my body cam's not rolling when you do. The line went dead, a cold finality that rattled him more than threats ever could. He rose, slipping his phone into his pocket, and headed straight for Frank's makeshift room, his mind a storm of worst-case scenarios. Inside, Frank sensed Turner's urgency before the sergeant even knocked. Maverick rose first, standing protectively between the door and Frank's cot. Turner stepped in and shut the door behind him. His voice was steady, but his eyes told a darker truth. Frank, someone's coming for you tonight. Not tomorrow. Not with warrants tonight. We're all you've got until sunrise. I need you ready. Can you trust us? Frank met Maverick's loyal stare, then looked back at Turner with a tired, iron resolve. Son, after everything I've survived, trust is easy. Running again, that's the hard part. Outside the thin door, Henderson's hand drifted to his sidearm, his heartbeat sinking with Maverick's low growl, ready for whoever dared to step through that hallway before dawn. The hum of the precinct's overnight lull was broken only by the faint buzz of fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of a chair as a rookie nodded off at his desk. But near Frank's makeshift room, sleep was a foreign concept. Sergeant Turner stood with Henderson by the door, eyes locked on the narrow hallway stretching toward the main entrance. Maverick paced silently behind them, his nails clicking on the linoleum floor like distant warning drums. Frank sat on the edge of the cot, tying the laces of boots older than most of the officers in this building. He could feel the old ache in his knees, but adrenaline dulled it for now. Every so often, he'd glance at Maverick, as if to reassure himself the dog was still real. Still here, still his. He didn't ask what Turner had heard on the phone. He didn't have to. Some truths a man recognized by the taste of fear creeping up his spine. At the front desk, Deputy Carla Ruiz checked the security feed for the 5th time in 10 minutes. She didn't like what she saw. A dark SUV idling too long by the curb, windows tinted too black for city codes. 2 figures stepped out, moving like men who didn't worry about being seen. She tapped her radio once. Sarge, we've got company. Unmarked. Not local uniforms. No visible ID. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled against the console. Turner cursed under his breath. He looked at Henderson, who checked the slide on his service pistol more out of habit than intent to use it. We hold this line, Luke. Nobody lays a hand on Frank or Maverick tonight. If they want him, they do it on camera in front of witnesses. He turned back to Frank, his expression apologetic but fierce. If I say run, you run. Don't look back. Maverick will follow. Frank huffed a humorless laugh. You ever try outrunning men half your age with legs full of shrapnel, Sergeant? Not exactly graceful. But don't worry, running's never been my best move. Standing my ground, though, that I remember how to do. He reached down, brushing a thumb across Maverick's head. The dog leaned into the touch, tail stiff, hackles raised at some scent or sound only he could sense. Outside, a muffled thud echoed through the lobby. Then another, closer this time. Ruiz's voice snapped through the radio. Front entrance breached. 2 unauthorized. Moving fast. Turning off cameras now. Someone's jamming the feed. Static swallowed her last words. Turner drew his weapon, stepping in front of Frank. Henderson braced beside him, hand on Maverick's harness. Frank rose to his feet with effort but stood tall, jaw set like a soldier awaiting orders in a war he thought he'd left behind. In the hallway, footsteps pounded closer, and Maverick growled low and deep, a promise to whoever dared cross the threshold that this time, he wouldn't be left behind. The door rattled under a fist pounding hard enough to splinter old hinges. Maverick lunged forward, teeth bared, the growl rumbling in his chest like distant thunder. Frank placed a calming hand on his head but never took his eyes off the door. Sergeant Turner motioned for silence, raising 2 fingers to Henderson. Wait for the breach, don't waste bullets too soon. They could hear muffled voices outside, calm and clipped, men who came to take something and wouldn't leave empty-handed. Deputy Ruiz's voice crackled over the radio, strained and breathless. 2 more by the back exit. They've cut power to the side halls. No patrol cars in sight. Sarge, you're on your own. Turner didn't bother replying. He knew she'd stay at her post until the last second, blocking every report from going out to dispatch. A few good officers against the shadows of a system they trusted. Some odds never changed, Frank thought grimly. Henderson pressed his back to the wall beside the door, gun ready but angled low. Frank, if this goes sideways, you drop. Maverick stays in front of you. No hero stuff. Frank barked a dry laugh that startled them both. Son, at my age, everything's hero stuff. Don't worry. He knows what to do. He always did. He turned, meeting Maverick's eyes, and for a heartbeat, Henderson saw something ancient pass between man and dog, an understanding deeper than any handler's command. The door burst inward with a splintering crack. 2 men in plain black tactical gear flooded the room, weapons raised but silencers screwed tight. Turner fired first, a shot that went wide but forced them back. Henderson stepped forward, shielding Frank as Maverick shot past his legs like a missile. The shepherd slammed into the first intruder's thigh, jaws clamping down with the force of a trap snapping shut. The man's muffled yell drowned under Maverick's growl and the chaos of another gunshot from Turner's sidearm. Frank dropped to one knee, arms around Maverick's flank, voice low but fierce. Good boy. Hold. Hold. Maverick obeyed. Teeth locked, body coiled like a spring, refusing to back down even as the second intruder swung his rifle toward Frank's exposed head. Henderson didn't think. Training took over. He lunged, tackling the man into the flimsy office wall, the impact rattling the glass behind them. The second man's weapon clattered to the floor, useless. In the tangle of bodies and barked orders, Maverick released the first intruder just long enough to snap at the second man's arm, tearing fabric and flesh in a blur of fury. Frank, breathless but upright, locked eyes with Turner amid the wreckage of the door and the groans of the subdued men. Sergeant, he rasped, voice trembling but proud. I told you, he remembers his orders. Turner nodded once, chest heaving, guns still leveled at the downed intruders. And now, Frank, Turner said through gritted teeth, we finish this once and for all. The aftermath settled like dust after a storm. 2 men in black tactical gear lay restrained on the floor, wrists zip-tied by Henderson with hands that still trembled from adrenaline. Maverick paced between the bodies, tail high, chest heaving, but every few seconds he circled back to Frank's side, an old sentinel guarding his last mission. Sergeant Turner holstered his weapon and leaned against the splintered doorframe, catching his breath. He glanced at Henderson, who wiped a smear of blood from his temple where the second intruder had grazed him with an elbow. You good? Turner asked. Henderson nodded, a grin tugging at the edge of his mouth despite the chaos. I'll live. We all will, thanks to him. He nodded at Maverick, who paused, ears flicking back at the sound of his name, then returned to sniffing Frank's boot as if to check he was still whole. Outside the room, Deputy Ruiz and 2 backup officers, finally brave enough to appear once the danger had passed, cuffed the intruders and began radioing for real transport. Turner knew the precinct's quiet secret was about to explode into a full-scale investigation. An illegal black ops retrieval attempt, a hidden past nobody at City Hall would dare explain on camera. Good. Let the truth burn through the paper walls these men had hidden behind. Frank lowered himself carefully back onto the battered cot, Maverick pressing his head into the old man's lap with a soft whine. Frank scratched behind his ears, feeling the weight slip from his shoulders for the first time since the jungles of Vietnam. He never forgot, Frank murmured, voice cracking with relief and pride. They trained him 100 different ways, but they couldn't break what mattered. He came home. That's all I ever needed. Turner knelt to eye level with Frank, his tone softer now that the fight was done. Frank, I put my badge on the line for you tonight, and I'd do it again. But they'll come back. Maybe not tonight, maybe not next week, but people like them don't just give up. We'll protect you both, I swear it. But you and Maverick, you ever think about disappearing? Starting over somewhere they can't reach? Frank looked at Maverick, who licked his palm as if answering for both of them. He shook his head slowly, a smile ghosting across his face. I ran once, hid behind orders and walls and empty bottles. Not anymore. If they come again, they'll find us standing right here. Together, they can keep their secrets. I've got mine back where he belongs. As dawn broke beyond the cracked office blinds, streaks of gold slipped over Frank's shoulder and caught the proud glint in Maverick's eyes. In that quiet corner of the city, a soldier and his loyal companion sat side by side. 2 souls no war or corruption could tear apart again. And for the first time in decades, Frank Miller believed he was truly finally home.